welcome back to the European Market Open. 40 or so minutes to go until the start of the European equity session, and actually the DAX futures looking a little brighter than they did. CAC futures still under pressure, but things may be shifting a little bit, moving to the upside just a touch. US futures still under pressure, but not as much as they were perhaps. And Mark, we need to be mindful of the fact we have a really important data point coming later on today in the shape of US CPI, given just how much we've talked about inflation over recent weeks.
Yeah, that slight uptick we're seeing in sentiment is because of the good earnings we've seen already out of Europe this morning, including from your previous guest there, Commerzbank. But absolutely, we're completely focused on US CPI. And I think that's a large part of why the US session was relatively calmer yesterday. It's because everyone's been really hyping up this CPI print. We're pretty clear on the MLive team that we think that whatever happens today, ultimately US yields are going higher in the coming weeks. It might mean there's a pullback over the next kind of couple of days if we get a soft print, or it might mean it really accelerates to the top side. But either way, in a few weeks' time, we do expect higher yields again.
Okay, 1.61. That's where we are on the US 10-year, so just so I remember it this time tomorrow. Mark, let's talk about something else that is very, of course, topical and dominating our thinking. That is the fight against COVID-19. Sinovac Biotech's vaccine is wiping out COVID-19 among health workers in Indonesia. It's an encouraging sign for the dozens of developing countries reliant on the controversial vaccine to perform far worse than Western vaccines in clinical trials.
The results from phase 3 trials are from a sample consisting of tens of thousands of people. But the more important data is mass use in the real world. We now have real-world data in Chile, where tens of millions of people have been inoculated. There, you see protection against ICU is at 89%, and over 80% against hospitalization. Isn't this more convincing data? So, we encourage our partners and governments in countries where our vaccines are being used to release such data as soon as possible. The results from the real world and the data we have from clinical trials will allow the world to judge our vaccine comprehensively.
You talked about Chile, where initial real-world data has shown that Coronavac does bring down incidence of severe disease and death. But cases are rising in Chile again, and that's raising questions about Sinovac's ability to quell the outbreak there. What's your response to that?
Sinovac was distributed from older groups to younger ones in Chile. But we only provided Chile with less than 15 million doses of the vaccine. Each person gets 2 shots. That means only 7 million people have been vaccinated. In other words, the vaccination rate of Chile, with a population of 19 million, is only 36%. Meanwhile, with such a low rate, the people who are most active are under 60 years old, meaning the vaccination rate of this group is far from enough. In this case, it's normal that the virus cases will rise when activities are back.
Where are you looking to bolster supply, and are you looking to export Coronavac to any new countries? Are there any new deals that you've made?
The biggest challenge we have so far is how to meet the demand. We've provided about 50 million doses of vaccines to Brazil and Indonesia, and about 20 million doses to Turkey, which accounts to 20% of their population. But that is not enough, as the virus is still spreading. We need to expand our supply, which is a really big challenge.
That was the CEO of Sinovac, Yin Weidong, speaking to Bloomberg exclusively. Really interesting conversation. We look ahead to seeing more of the data behind that particular vaccine. Coming up, we speak to the CEO of Ahold Delhaize. That's after the supermarket retailer's first quarter sales beat estimates. They've increased their guidance, raising their earnings forecast after a strong first quarter. But they're sounding a little cautious in some of their outlook. We'll get to that shortly. This is Bloomberg. Welcome back to the European Market Open. Half an hour until the start of the cash equities trading session. Things turning around a little bit when it comes to the earnings story here, in particular from Germany. We've had a host of earnings out from Germany already, and so futures up by 0.2%. FTSE futures flat after losing 2.4% or so on yesterday's session. Mark, let's talk about the global market picture, though. The semiconductor story, the margin call story, and why you also focused on what's going on in Taiwan. Give us the sort of size and scope about why this matters.
Yeah, the Taiwan moves this morning were really incredible. Unfortunately, there were losses rather than gains, but they still completely fascinated the attention of the kind of whole market briefly. Because it wasn't that wild a day. So we saw the Taiwan stock market at one point down 8.6%. Now this was already after a very, very large fall yesterday. At one point for the year, you know, for the since the April highs only a couple of weeks ago, it was down almost 15% at one point, and then it rebounded incredibly strongly. So you can see there on that chart that this puts the one-day moves going back over the last 50 years in context. That red dot is where it was intraday, i.e. completely unprecedented. Those blue dotted lines showed the limits did change, so it's a slightly different comparison, but it was still never seen before move. Now, part of the context behind this is that we've seen an explosion in volumes in the early start of this period of this year, as the Taiwan stock market reached fresh highs, record highs, almost by the day. And that is about the massive involvement of retail traders. So what's happened over the last 48 hours is very, very large margin calls happen, which is cleaning out the retail trading audience. And that has just seen basically a lesson for the rest of the equity markets of the world, where we know retail traders have stepped up their involvement. So I think this has been a really fascinating story, and I'm curious to see how it plays out tomorrow. Now that those retail traders have been cleaned out, do they get back in, or are they now kind of scared of this market for a while?
Yeah, the amount of the big rise up in volumes we'd seen and exposure to this market in the run up to these events today, quite stunning on some of those charts that we saw from our colleague David Inglis in earlier Asia programming. Let's get to the earnings story though, Mark, because we need to keep across that as well. Ahold Delhaize has raised its forecast for 2021 earnings after a strong first quarter, but the grocer warns that business may become tougher in the rest of the year. That's after social constraints have begun to lift and consumers' spending behaviour returns to normal. The retailer experienced a pandemic-driven boom in grocery sales last year. Let's speak now to Frans Muller, Ahold Delhaize CEO. Frans, thank you so much for coming to speak to us today. So I understand the drivers of your strong